I stood at the polished oak of my kitchen table, my hands trembling as I held a photograph of my wife, Clara, laughing as she embraced my brother, Marcus. The genuine joy in her expression in that picture cut me like a shard of glass. 30 years of marriage, of sacrifice, of a life I thought we had built together, and this was my reward. But when I finally confronted her with the truth, she just shrugged, her eyes cold and dismissive. "You shouldn't care." I smiled, a hollow, brittle thing, and handed her the sealed envelope I had prepared. Then I turned and walked out of the house, and out of her life. The raw, guttural scream that tore from her throat as she opened it still echoes in my mind. That moment wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I was going to get justice for myself, and no one, not even the woman I once loved or the brother I once trusted, was going to stop me. I sat at a secluded corner table in a dimly lit restaurant, the gentle clink of glasses and the murmured conversations of strangers swirling around me like a thick, insulating fog. Rain streaked down the large windows, blurring the neon glow of downtown Boston into a watercolor of melancholy reds and blues. My fingers, usually so steady, tapped an agitated rhythm on the stem of a wine glass. The wait for Clara was stretching longer than her usual fashionable tardiness. 30 years of marriage, and I still reflexively gave her the benefit of the doubt. Foolish, perhaps. Or maybe just hopeful. Then, through a gap in the bustling crowd, I saw them. Across the room, tucked away in a plush, circular booth under the warm, flickering light of a wall sconce, Clara was leaning intimately toward Marcus. Her hand, the one that wore the wedding ring I had placed on it 3 decades ago, rested on his arm. Her laugh, sharp and bright, sliced through the ambient hum of the restaurant. My brother, with his slick, confident grin and a tailored jacket I knew he couldn't afford, tilted his head closer, whispering something that made her eyes spark with a light I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I froze. The wine glass trembled in my grip, and a single drop of deep red Cabernet spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. It spread instantly, a blooming stain like a fresh drop of blood. I had come here to surprise her, a spontaneous gesture to salvage a romantic evening after another grueling week at my forensic accounting firm. Instead, I was the one ambushed, blindsided in a public place. My chest tightened, each breath becoming a conscious, difficult effort against the immense weight of what I was witnessing. Are they just catching up? My mind desperately offered. Marcus had always been the charming one, the charismatic younger brother I had bailed out of countless debts, the one I had always, foolishly, trusted. But Clara's fingers lingered too long on his sleeve. Her smile was too intimate, her gaze too focused. This was not the affection of a sister-in-law. "Thomas?" Her voice, cool and sharp, cut through my daze. She'd seen me. Her expression shifted instantly from unguarded delight to something harder, more controlled, like a porcelain mask snapping into place. Marcus leaned back, his own easy smile tightening at the edges as he made a show of adjusting the flashy watch on his wrist, a watch I had a sinking feeling I had indirectly paid for. "Clara," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I didn't expect to see you here." She slid out of the booth, her movements fluid as she smoothed the front of her silk dress. "Oh, it's just Marcus. You know, just catching up on old times." Her tone was light, airy, but her eyes darted to the side, a telltale sign of evasion I had willfully ignored for years. "Catching up," I echoed, my gaze flicking to my brother. He flashed a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Good to see you, Thomas. It's been a while." I nodded, the words I wanted to say, the accusations, the questions, lodged in my throat like stones. The restaurant, moments ago a warm and inviting space, now felt claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of garlic, expensive perfume, and betrayal. I stood, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'll let you two get back to it." "Thomas, wait," Clara started, a flicker of panic in her eyes. But I was already moving, weaving through the tables, the abandoned wine glass and its crimson stain a silent accusation I left in my wake. The cold Boston rain hit my face as I pushed through the heavy oak door. The shock of it was a welcome sting, a physical sensation to distract from the emotional agony. My own watch, a simple, understated timepiece, caught my eye. The second hand was frozen at 7:43 p.m. The battery had died. Time itself seemed to be mocking me, marking the exact moment my life had fractured. In my car, the engine hummed, but I didn't drive. Rain pelted the windshield, each drop a new question hammering at my resolve. How long had this been going on? Had I been so blind, so buried in my work, that I had missed it? Or had they simply been that good at hiding their deceit? My hand brushed against an old, worn envelope on the passenger seat. It contained a birthday card from Clara from years ago, a silly, loving note tucked inside. It now felt like a relic from a forgotten civilization, a life that no longer existed. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I had built everything for her, our home, our comfortable life, our future. And Marcus, the brother I had carried through his endless failures and financial disasters, sat in that warm, cozy booth with her, laughing at my expense. The image was a searing brand on my mind, but a sliver of my analytical nature pushed back. Was it just a single, ill-advised moment, or was it something more? I needed to know the truth. I needed to remember who we were before this devastating night, if only to understand how it all went so wrong. The rain hadn't stopped, its relentless drumming on the roof of our suburban home a somber percussion to my thoughts. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from a single flickering lamp that Clara had always complained was outdated. A heavy photo album lay open on my lap, its pages filled with memories I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit anymore. The scene from the restaurant replayed in my mind on an endless, torturous loop, Clara's laugh, Marcus's proprietary smirk, the wine staining the perfect white tablecloth. My coffee had long gone cold in the mug beside me, but I didn't notice. I flipped a page. There we were, 30 years younger, standing in front of our first home, a cramped bungalow we'd painted ourselves over a long weekend. Clara was wearing my old flannel shirt, her face beaming as she held up a paintbrush, her cheeks speckled with white paint. I had worked double shifts for a year to save the down payment for that place, coming home exhausted to her infectious laughter, her warmth. When had that warmth cooled to a polite, distant chill? Another photo. Our wedding day. Her veil catching the spring breeze, her eyes, I had thought, full of love for me. I had promised to give her everything, and I had tried. The long nights at the office, the meticulous work of a forensic accountant, all of it was to build a life of security and comfort for her. To buy her the diamond earrings she'd admired, the bigger house she deserved. And she had thanked me, her arms wrapped around my neck, her gratitude a fuel that kept me going. But over time, those moments of genuine connection had faded, replaced by a subtle, creeping sense of dissatisfaction. "This life is so small, Thomas," she'd said once, years ago, staring out of our new bay window at the manicured lawns of our neighborhood. At the time, I had thought she was talking about the view. Now, I understood she was talking about me. I turned another page, and a letter, its edges yellowed with age, slipped out. Her handwriting, once so familiar and cherished, stared back at me. "Thomas, you are my hero. Always and forever." The word hero was a cruel, ironic sting. I crumpled the paper in my fist, its faint, familiar scent of her perfume clinging to my fingers. I threw it into the wastebasket with a soft, unsatisfying thud. The house was too quiet, the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall the only sound. I had sacrificed my own dreams for her. The trips to the coast I'd wanted to take. The small sailboat I had sketched out in a notebook. For what? To watch her lean into my brother in a dimly lit restaurant? To feel like a stranger in my own life? I had trusted him, too. Paid his university tuition when he dropped out. Lent him thousands of dollars for his endless series of sure-thing business deals that always fell through. He was the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything. Not this time. I stood, pacing the room, the open album a frozen past mocking my turbulent present. Clara's coldness hadn't appeared overnight. It had been a slow, creeping frost over many years. Her complaints had grown sharper, her eyes always seeming to search for something more, something I couldn't provide. For years, I had blamed myself. I thought I wasn't exciting enough, not successful enough, not enough. Now, I wondered if the deficiency was hers, not mine. The rain finally slowed to a persistent drizzle, but my thoughts continued to race. I couldn't keep drowning in doubt. I couldn't let this uncertainty eat me alive. I needed facts, not memories. The crumpled letter in the trash felt like a definitive line drawn between the man I was and the man I needed to become. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through my contacts. There was a name I hadn't called in years, a man who trafficked in uncomfortable truths. Mickey Rourke. A private investigator. My thumb hovered over the screen, the clock in the hall ticking louder and louder in my ears. This was the point of no return. The morning light, gray and diluted, filtered through the blinds of my downtown Boston office. For decades, this cramped space had been my kingdom, a place where I brought order to the chaos of numbers. Today, the neat columns in my ledgers meant nothing. All I could see was Clara's hand on Marcus's arm. Calling Mickey meant crossing a line. It meant admitting, in a real and tangible way, that I didn't trust my wife or my brother. But living in the darkness of suspicion was a far worse fate. I hit dial. Rourke, a gravelly voice answered. Mickey, it's Thomas Sterling. I need your help. My voice was steady, but my pulse was a frantic, runaway train. Sterling. Been a while. What's the trouble? I heard the creak of a chair, the subtle shift from casual conversation to professional attention. I need you to look into someone for me. Discreetly. The words were heavy, tasting like failure. My wife, Clara. I paused, then added, and my brother, Marcus. A low whistle came through the line. All right. Meet me at the diner on 5th in an hour. Bring whatever you've got. I hung up, my hand shaking slightly. From my wallet, I pulled a photo of Clara from our 25th anniversary, her smile so radiant, so convincing. I stared at it, searching for the lie, then slid it into an old envelope from the car. The diner smelled of stale coffee and fried bacon. Mickey sat in a corner booth, a cigarette smoldering in an ashtray, his face a roadmap of late nights and bad news. He nodded as I slid in across from him, his sharp eyes scanning me as if I were a piece of evidence. Spill it, Thomas, he said, taking a sip of black coffee. I pushed the envelope across the table. I saw them together last night. They were too close. I need to know what's really going on. Mickey glanced at the photo. This her? I nodded. He tucked it away. It won't be cheap. But I'll find whatever is there to be found. Anything else? They're clever, I said, my voice low. Marcus has always been slippery. And Clara, she's not the person she used to be. Mickey grunted, jotting a note on a crumpled napkin. Give me a week. And stay calm, Thomas. Don't let them know you're on to them. Back in my office, I locked the envelope in my desk drawer. Its presence was a quiet, ticking bomb. The rain hadn't let up, mirroring the storm in my chest. What would Mickey find? A brief, foolish fling? Or a long, calculated deception? The truth felt like a blade, and it was getting closer with every tick of the clock. The rain had turned to a miserable, bone-chilling drizzle by the time I reached Mickey's office again, 3 days later. The city streets glistened under the perpetually gray sky, the mood of the city as restless as my own. His call this morning had been brief, his voice devoid of emotion. Got something you need to see. His office was on the second floor of a squat brick building in the old part of town, up a staircase that creaked as if it held the grudges of 1,000 desperate clients. Inside, it was a cluttered mess of teetering files and stale cigarette smoke. He didn't waste time, pushing a new, thicker folder toward me as I sat down. "Take a look," he said, a fresh cigarette already burning between his fingers. I opened it. The first photo hit me like a physical blow. Clara and Marcus in his car, her hand resting on his, their faces close, caught in a moment of casual intimacy that was never meant for my eyes. Another shot, them emerging from a boutique hotel downtown, Marcus's arm wrapped possessively around her waist. My chest went cold, each image carving away the last remnants of my doubt. 30 years of marriage, reduced to grainy, irrefutable proof of betrayal. "There's more," Mickey said, watching my reaction with a professional, detached curiosity. "Marcus isn't just playing around with your wife. He's got something else going on. Something that could burn him, and anyone close to him, very badly." I looked up, my fingers still resting on the glossy surface of the photos. "What is it?" Mickey leaned back, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Not sure of the specifics yet. Looks like he's mixed up in some shady real estate deals. Money moving through shell corporations. I'm close to getting the details, but it's tricky. If I'm right, this could completely ruin him." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You want me to keep pushing?" "Yes," I said, my voice flat but firm. "I need it all." He held the folder, the weight of the truth heavier than he could have imagined. Thomas now had the proof to destroy his marriage, but the hint of a deeper conspiracy lingered. Should he stop here, or push further into the darkness? Let us know what you would do in the comments, and subscribe to see how deep the betrayal goes. Mickey nodded, scribbling something on a notepad. "All right. But this kind of dirt, it's not just personal anymore. It could be dangerous." I tucked the damning photos into the envelope. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a cold, pure rage I hadn't allowed myself to feel until this very moment. Clara's smile in those pictures wasn't the one I had fallen in love with. It was calculated, cruel. And Marcus, who had mocked my boring accounting job while I bailed him out of his latest financial mess, had finally crossed a line from which there was no return. Back home, I spread the photos across the kitchen table. Each one was a fresh wound, but also a potential weapon. Mickey's warning about Marcus's deals echoed in my mind. What else were they hiding? I stared at the images, my forensic accountant's mind starting to churn. I wouldn't confront them with this. Not yet. I needed a plan. Something sharp, something precise. Something that would cut through their web of lies and leave them with nothing. The dining room glowed with the soft, intimate light of a dozen candles. The table was set with the fine china we hadn't used in years. Rain pattered against the windows of our Boston home, a gentle drumbeat to the tension coiling in my chest. I adjusted my tie, my reflection in the hall mirror showing a man I barely recognized. Graying at the temples, yes, but with a new, steady resolve in his eyes. Tonight was our 30th anniversary, a milestone Clara had insisted we celebrate at home. I had played along, knowing this was my stage. Clara swept into the room, a vision in a burgundy dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her smile was as polished as the silverware. "Everything looks perfect, Thomas," she said, her voice honeyed, but her eyes flicked anxiously toward the door. Marcus was coming, of course. I nodded, my face a carefully constructed mask of placidity, and poured her a glass of wine. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked, each second a countdown. I had spent weeks meticulously building my plan, the envelope of evidence a heavy secret hidden away in my office. Tonight wasn't for the final confrontation. Not yet. Tonight was for observation. We sat, the air thick with her expensive perfume and my silent suspicion. She raised her glass, her bracelet glinting. "To us," she said, her tone a masterclass in performance. 30 years of love. 30 years, I echoed, my voice low, my eyes locked on hers. Her hand trembled, just for a moment, as she set her glass down. Then I saw it. Her other hand, hidden in her lap, was clutching something small and powdery, a folded piece of paper. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral, sipping my water instead of the wine. She turned to adjust a napkin, and in that split second, her fingers moved with practiced speed over my wine glass. A faint, almost invisible dust fell into the deep red liquid. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot, but I didn't flinch. A sedative? Something worse? I didn't know, but the betrayal burned hotter and more intensely than ever. She truly thought me a fool, a blind pawn in whatever game she and Marcus were playing. I smiled, a thin, humorless expression, and slid the glass slightly to the side, untouched. "I'm not very thirsty tonight," I said, my tone light. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in her perfect facade. "Dessert?" she asked, a little too quickly, standing to fetch a tray from the kitchen. Her hands shook as she sliced the cake, the knife catching the candlelight like a warning. I leaned back in my chair, the clock ticking louder and louder in my ears. She was unraveling, and I hadn't even shown my hand. The rain outside grew heavier, a fitting soundtrack to the storm that was about to break. The final dinner was a masterpiece of tension. The dining room was my stage, the long table set with crisp linens and gleaming glasses. The scent of roasted herbs mingled with the damp air from the persistent rain outside. I moved through our home with a quiet, deliberate purpose, arranging plates, pouring wine. Each action was a step toward the reckoning. The envelope, now thick with evidence, was a ticking bomb in my jacket pocket. Clara, Marcus, and his wife, Isabel, would be here soon. Clara entered first, her smile as brittle as the autumn leaves scattered outside. "You've outdone yourself, Thomas," she said, her voice too bright, her eyes avoiding mine. I nodded, watching her restless fingers adjust a napkin. Marcus arrived next, his laugh booming through the house. "Thomas, you old dog." "Pulling out all the stops," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His eyes, however, scanned the room, lingering on Clara for a beat too long. Isabel followed, her face pale, her greeting a quiet murmur. She clutched her purse like a lifeline, her gaze flickering nervously between her husband and Clara. We sat. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked, a steady pulse beneath the strained small talk. Clara played the perfect hostess, her laughter forced, her hand brushing Marcus's as she passed him the bread. Isabel barely spoke, her fork scraping against her plate. I watched it all, my silence a deliberate, heavy presence, my own wine glass untouched. "To family," Marcus said, raising his glass, his grin wide but his eyes sharp. "And to Thomas, for bringing us all together." "Family," I repeated, my tone even, my eyes fixed on Clara. She froze, her glass halfway to her lips, then forced a brittle smile. Isabel's knuckles were white as she gripped her napkin. The moment stretched, heavy and taut. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood. All eyes snapped to me. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a smaller, thinner folder, one containing only the photographs. I didn't speak. I let the pictures spill onto the table, a cascade of irrefutable betrayal. Clara and Marcus in the cafe. Outside the hotel. In his car, their faces too close. The images landed like physical blows, silencing the room. Clara's glass trembled, wine sloshing over the rim. Marcus snatched a photo, his jaw tight, his charm evaporating like smoke. Isabel's hand flew to her mouth, a choked, wounded sob escaping her lips. I watched them, my face carved from stone, my heart a furnace of cold, righteous anger. "What is this, Thomas?" Clara's voice was sharp, but it cracked. "Are you spying on me?" "Spying?" I said, my tone low and cutting. "I didn't need to. You weren't exactly discreet." I leaned forward. "You thought I would never notice." Marcus stammered, fumbling with the photo. "Thomas, come on. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" Isabel's voice broke, raw with pain, her eyes blazing at her husband. You lied to me. To all of us. She shoved her chair back, tears streaming down her face. Clara's lips curled, a last, desperate grasp at control. This is a private matter, Thomas. You shouldn't care. Her words, so dismissive, so arrogant, were the final trigger. I had replayed them in my head for weeks. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out the thick envelope, the one that held not just their affair, but their ruin. I placed it on the table in front of her, my movements deliberate, my eyes never leaving hers. Open it, I said, my voice steady, cold. Her fingers hesitated. The clock struck midnight, its chime a tolling bell. The rain roared outside. Clara's hand twitched toward the envelope, her eyes wide with a dawning fear. Marcus's face had drained of all color. Isabel's sobs grew quiet. I stood, unmoved, waiting for the scream I knew was coming. The dining room was a battlefield strewn with the wreckage of shattered illusions. The photographs lay scattered across the table, their glossy surfaces reflecting the accusatory candlelight. Rain pounded against the windows, a furious, cleansing roar that matched the chaos unfolding inside. Clara clutched the envelope I had placed before her, her fingers trembling. She tore it open, the paper ripping with a sound like tearing flesh. A single, multi-page document slid out, its stark, clinical print a quiet bomb in the center of the room. She scanned it, her breath hitching, her eyes widening in disbelief, then horror. And then she screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure terror that cut through the storm outside. The paper fluttered from her numb fingers to the floor. I knew what she had just read. A detailed medical report from a specialist, outlining a chronic, communicable disease that Marcus had been diagnosed with over a year ago. A condition he had a legal and moral obligation to disclose. A condition he had knowingly passed to her in their reckless, sordid affair. You knew, Clara whirled on Marcus, her voice a guttural snarl. You knew and you didn't tell me. She lunged at him, shoving him hard, her nails raking his arm. He flinched, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of defense. Clara, I didn't. It's not like that. Isabel stood, her chair toppling over with a crash, her voice shaking with rage. You monster, she spat at her husband. Then she turned to me, her eyes pleading. Thomas, why didn't you warn me? Her words stung, but I held her gaze, my own unyielding. I warned you tonight, I said, my voice calm and final. You are free now, Isabel. We both are. Clara sank to her knees, clutching the damning document, her sobs ragged and desperate. Thomas, please, she begged, her voice breaking. We can fix this. I didn't mean. You meant every choice, I cut in, my tone like ice. Every lie. Every betrayal. You and Marcus chose this path together. I stepped back, my shadow falling over the ruined dinner table. You are not my problem anymore. Thomas, I'm your brother, Marcus mumbled, a last, desperate plea. Family doesn't do this, I said, turning away. The photographs crunched under my shoe as I walked, a fitting end to their charade. Isabel had already fled the room. I followed, leaving Clara's wails and Marcus's stunned silence behind me. Outside, the rain soaked my coat, cold and cleansing. The stopped clock, the poisoned wine, the 30 years of lies, it was all in the past. I walked to my car, the streetlights blurring in the downpour, my thoughts on the quiet freedom that waited for me beyond this catastrophic night. Clara's scream still rang in my ears, but it was no longer my burden to bear. I was done carrying their secrets. I was done carrying them. The ocean stretched out before the wide windows of my new apartment, its waves a steady, rhythmic pulse under a sky finally free of Boston's endless rain. I stood in the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, the scent of salt air mingling with fresh paint. 6 months had passed since that night. 6 months since Clara's scream and Marcus's collapse under the weight of his own deceit. The divorce papers, signed in a quiet lawyer's office with a hand steadier than I had expected, were a quiet victory, a definitive line drawn between the man I was and the man I was becoming. I lifted an old mantel clock from a box, the same one that had stopped during that first, fateful confrontation in the restaurant. I carefully wound it, and its familiar tick filled the room, a sound not of time lost, but of time reclaimed. The apartment was small, perched on the rocky coast of Cape Cod, a world away from the sprawling suburban house I had built for Clara. But it was mine. Every corner was free of her shadow, her lies. I set the clock on a shelf, its hands moving forward, just like me. The past still lingered, but only in fleeting fragments. I had given up so many of my own dreams for Clara, the trips abroad, the small sailboat I'd sketched in a notebook, while she had sneered at what she called my small life. I didn't know where she and Marcus were now, and I didn't care to know. Their ruin was of their own making. I had simply walked away from the wreckage. I stepped out onto the small balcony, the ocean's roar a song of endless possibility. A new notebook lay on a small table, its pages filled with plans, a trip to Italy, a photography course, a life I had delayed for far too long. I had spent decades balancing books for others. Now, the only ledger that mattered was my own. The envelope, once a vessel for love, then for evidence, was gone. I had burned it in a fire pit on the beach weeks ago, its ashes scattered by the wind, just like my old life. The sun dipped low, painting the waves in hues of gold and crimson. I thought of Isabel, and hoped she had found her own peace. I thought of the dining room, the photographs, the moment I had reclaimed my dignity. Justice hadn't been allowed, triumphant shout. It was this. This quiet, solitary peace. The clock ticked inside, steady and sure. I smiled, my fingers tracing a postcard from Florence I had pinned to the wall. I would be there soon. The ocean whispered, endless and alive. I leaned on the railing, my shoulders finally relaxed, my mind finally clear. The future was an open horizon, a map I would now chart for myself. I turned and went back inside, the clock's rhythm a quiet promise of the road ahead.